woolen socks and the woolen hats, finally. Woo! And the umbrellas.
I was very happy with the sun too. Yeah.
Yeah, rain is why we have a good living here. That's how I see it.
True. Hey, Ria says, welcome everyone, and for the best view, you can select to view only the speaker if you want. Otherwise, you can view all of us.
I think as people enter the room, it's quite nice to see everyone, and then you can switch it to the speaker view.
Super, I think we can start, Julien. Do you agree?
Great, yes.
Yeah, okay. Then welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining. Thank you especially to you, Julien, for your time and offering your expertise to today's workshop. My name is Regina, and I'm program manager at Kickstart, and I'm gonna help you to moderate this workshop and also to help you all for the Q&A later on. If you have any questions, you can always type on the chat box the questions, or you can also ask Julien, interrupt him just on the flow and discuss the question if you need it. And I would like to give a brief introduction about Julien, our guest, and he's an AI expert, and he holds a Master of Science in Advanced Computing from Imperial College London, a PhD in Computer Vision from ETH Zurich, and he has conducted a postdoc research in machine learning at the Intelligence Maintenance Systems Lab at the ETH Zurich. After his PhD, Julien has worked for 2 years in a startup called Archeologic, which does 3D models of interiors and where he has been responsible for AI pipelines. 3 years ago, he founded VisualSense AI, and since then he has been advising companies on how to solve their AI challenges. That is, find out which data to collect, which algorithm to use, how to run experiments, and deploy to production. Julien also regularly conducts technical due diligence for VCs, and he also co-founded Free Walk Switzerland, the largest walking tour organization in Switzerland. Julien was named a global shaper by the World Economic Forum and has been part of Davos Lab Task Force, where he has been focusing on making proposals on AI ethics. And I really hope you enjoyed this workshop, and I handed it over to Julien.
Thank you very much, Regina, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. So as Regina mentioned, feel free to just ask questions along the way. I'll share my screen. Okay. And today we're talking about the tech due diligence. So I've conducted a few, and we're going to look at, first of all, why are investors conducting a tech due diligence? So this is one of the reasons. Maybe you have heard of Theranos, which was a startup that was pretending that they could detect diseases with a single drop of blood. It was valued at $9 billion US dollars, but then it turned out that it was not actually true. So some investors lost a lot of money. And maybe you have also heard of Nikola. So for Nikola, it's a little different in the sense that Theranos was a fraud, but Nikola, we don't exactly know what was communicated or not. But it was at least a deception it was a disappointment, at least for the broad public. And here you can see the Nikola truck is an electric truck. And then people figured out that this was actually not running with an engine, but it was just going down the hill. And so, let me switch slides. Yes. So why investors are conducting a due diligence? Of course, the number one reason you might think of is to cover themselves. But the other reason is that they want to pick the best apples from the tree. And if you just look at the surface of the apple, it may be hard to know which is the best one, but if you can cut and look inside, it will help to estimate the potential and the value of a startup. So what are investors looking for? Well, obviously, unicorns, but also that claims are true. They want to know about the defensibility of the technology and the scalability. I'll be focusing on the AI startup cases. And the sweet spot for AI startups is that typically they use machine learning. And in machine learning, you never have 100% of true positives. So you'll have some false negatives, some false positives. And you want to have a sweet spot where when there is a mistake, it doesn't cost a huge amount, so just not in terms necessarily of money, but also of reputation, or like the consequences are not too much of a disaster. But when it is a true positive, then you get a good enough reward. So just to give you an example, it means that if you were to do let's say a robot that helps for surgeries, then when it works out, like when it helps the surgeon get better results, like of course that brings a lot of value. But of course, if it makes a mistake, that would be disastrous. So you want to make sure in that case it doesn't make too bad mistakes. And the process of a tech due diligence is typically that there is first an NDA between the reviewer and the startup. Then the startup will send a pitch deck and a tech report explaining how they do the technology, and there will be interviews. So now we'll take a look at a fictive example. So you've seen just here, okay, the first step is an NDA. So obviously I cannot tell about details of what happened in these reviews. So I just made up an example. This is Fruit Basket. You have all these websites that make you like logos with some supposedly AI tech. I don't know if it's the case, but at least it looks okay. And if you will, we can all jump onto this link, which I will copy and paste in the talk. Okay. You all have it? Yes.
Yes, we do.
So now if you jump onto the Jamboard, I like to involve you here. And if you could take some sticky notes, so you will see on the side, on the left side, you have some tools, there are some sticky notes, and then we'll add some of them. So because we're quite many people, I've done several different frames. So there is one about claims are true, one about it's defensible, and one it's scalable. Before we get started, I'll give you a little introduction about the startup. So maybe I'll share my, am I sharing the right screen? No. So let me switch to here. Yeah. Okay. I'll just present this. Good. Okay. Okay. So imagine that you have a smart scale that checks which fruits and vegetables are weighted at the supermarket. So typically today, you go to the supermarket, you have to weight your fruits and vegetables. You have to pick which one it is. It is a bit of work, and as a result, two things may happen. The first one is that you take more time to do this, so you buy less in the end. And the second problem is that maybe you pick the wrong label, or someone cheats and picks a cheaper label. So the idea here is, imagine if you could have a system that would monitor exactly what is happening, and then they could give you the label automatically. So they could print the tag. They have been deployed, let's say, in 2 microordinos, and they're in discussion with Cope. For now, the cashier is still scanning the articles. So let's just have a look at the questions that you might want to ask to check that the claims are true, that it's defensible, and it's scalable. So we'll go to the first frame. So go to frame number 2 at the top. There is the frames. I don't know if you see them. Yes, you're all moving. That's great. I still have like over 10 people on the first one. So just move to frame 2. It's at the top. There is 2 out of 7, or like 1 out of 7. And you click on it, and then you can move to number 2. Okay, and then you can pick a sticky note on the left side and just write what you would ask to check that the claims are true. You all have a sticky note. Looks like there isn't it. No. Okay, look. Okay, good. Okay, so how many foods can you detect, and how do you check that your system did it right? Okay, so let's move just so it all puts them at the same spot. I'll just be moving them around. So we'll just collect a few ideas, and just after that, we'll go over each of them. Okay. Okay, it's great because you have a lot of ideas. Okay, so let's start to go over each of them. Some of them are related. Okay. So I have 2 which are actually quite similar here. Share the test data, the false positive negatives, the metrics, the confusion matrix, describe the methodology and data set for training set. So these are, definitely you would ask for experiments. So how did they run their experiments and what are the results? That makes a lot of sense. And it's very important because then you can see, okay, does the methodology make any sense? How does it compare to how you would usually do it? And then you would check if the numbers are relatable to what you would expect. And you also want to know if the data that they use is something which is realistic or not. And if it's likely that when they try it in a real setting, that this would translate well. Then there is something about the experiences so far from the 2 pilots. You can ask them that. They will probably give you some indications. But there, actually, I saw somewhere else something about talking to the interview with the customer. Usually the investors or the business part of the due diligence will do that. They will talk to the customer to see if they're happy or not. And usually what happens is the investors will only do the tech due diligence when they think that there is already a good chance that it's an interesting startup for them. So it's usually after they have talked with the customer. What's important is it's good, like if you still ask, because you will see if they're honest a bit about the problems they might have had. So ask about all the problems they had. Yeah, so the volume, velocity, value, and variety of the data, that's a good point. Actually, I think this goes more into the like scalable and defensible part. So maybe we'll talk about that just later. So let me put it somewhere here. Then could I check with my fruits? I think this is a super valid one. So, and then there was can we do a demo? Can we have a demo? Does it work in real world? Okay, can I try it for a week? Okay, that's it long. Okay. Yeah. So there is a big chunk here of we want to do a demo, and definitely if you're assessing a startup, you should do a demo. And it's difficult to do it with a whole data set. So here maybe it's a bit easier because you can buy a lot of fruits or take a lot of pictures of fruits. But you want to check that it works at least on some examples. And if it doesn't work, you want to understand maybe why, so you can look more inside the intermediate results of the pipeline. And yeah. And then the very important thing is that in machine learning, the method is you have this training set and then a testing set. So if you test on the same data that you trained, then of course it will work very well. You could just have a system that learns by heart, so to say, and just compares the data and sees like, oh, this is the exact same picture of an apple that I had before, so it must be an apple. And this is not going to be very helpful. So it's very easy to cheat actually with this kind of systems when it comes to the demo part. So you can't trust what the startup is showing you, and you have to come up with your own training, not training, but testing data. And the important thing is that this might be different depending on also the specifics of the supermarket where this is deployed. So maybe you have pictures of fruits which are all with the same angle or all with the same light. And then in real conditions at the supermarket, you'll have different maybe angles or light. So it's really important to see that it works not only in some conditions, but in many different conditions. Okay, then I have customer confirmation. So I think that goes with the customer interview. And I guess you mean like what metric you used? The patents. So can we speak with your CTO? That for sure. And not only with the CTO, but I think with anyone who is able to guide you on how things work. It's also a good thing to see a bit how the team is playing together. So you can see if they're helping each other or not, or if they just leave someone to like not know what to say, then this is not a very good sign. And you, at the beginning, I think it's a very good idea to also speak to the CEO just to have the business pitch to understand, okay, this is what the startup aims to do, and this is their vision. Okay. Then the working POC, yeah, this is together here. Okay, this is a very good question. With which products do you see the most errors and what is the reason? Because this will give insights on what are the limitations of the tool that they have developed. And also it will give insights on the understanding that the team has of what the problems are and maybe what ideas they have to solve them. If they can't answer this question of where it doesn't work, it's a bad sign. Because then you know that maybe they haven't tested it enough. Maybe they don't have an idea of what to do to solve the problems. And also maybe they're just concealing that it doesn't work in some cases, which is a big problem. Okay. Then the types of fruits that one cannot detect. I think this is related. The in-field interview with cashier. This could be a good idea actually. It's related to the customer, but at the same time, maybe the customer is a little bit biased. They might not really have used the product, and they might think it's just very cool. But if in the end it doesn't work, maybe you will hear it with more honesty from the cashier. How many fruits can you detect? So this is around that. Did you actually save time and reduce the error? So this goes, I think, with the customers. And this is one of the questions that you would, well, a bit in between the customer and the startup, you would ask the startup what they think. I think this is the kind of question also, if you want to check if claims are true, this is the kind of question you could ask to multiple people in the company. Sometimes you don't have them all at the same time. So you can see if this is a bit coherent or not. Okay, then the POCs around here. Okay, I think so we are quite done, I think, on that part. There are things missing though. So the first thing which is a bit missing to check that the claims are true is at some point you would look at the code. So you don't need to look at the whole code to really check everything. But so of course I'm not going to give you any confidential information here, but just sharing some experience here is that it happened to me that once I want to look at the code, I look at the code and the method is not the same in the code that what they describe. Like it's very different. And then they say, oh, what we described was just what we're planning to do then. So, but they didn't frame it like that in the first place. So this is always insightful. And the second thing is that it also happened to me that sometimes they didn't want me to look at the code at all. And this is also a bit of a problem. And this will bring me to another frame. So I will just insert. Not a good idea. Okay, sorry.
Julian?
Yes.
We have people asking what they should do. Like maybe you can explain now again what they should write in these notes, because there are some new people that came in and
okay.
For them.
Yeah. So what is to do with the notes? That's the question. Yeah. Okay. So now we're just looking at an example of fictive startup, which is called here Fruit Basket. What they do is they have a system with a camera. They look at some at the fruits that people weigh at the supermarket, and they automatically put the label on the fruit. So they tell you exactly if it's apples or oranges and so on. So it avoids errors or stealing. So now what we're doing is we're looking at different aspects. So if claims are true, how defensible the technology is and how scalable it is. And the work we're doing together is each of you can ask the questions that you would ask to the startup. And then we're just seeing how this makes sense. So the next thing, so now we have just looked at some questions we can ask to check if the claims are true. And the next thing we're going to do is one specific case where the startup tells you everything about how they do it, but then they don't want to show you the method. So what we're going to do now is if we move on to the next frame, so at the top you can change the frame. Do the new people have the link? I don't know if they see the link. I'll just post it again. Okay, and if you move on to the next frame, number 3, what do you do? What does it mean, like the risks if the startup doesn't show their code? What does it mean? Of course, this is a bit of a specific example, but I think it happens sometimes. And I think what is interesting is when you detect that there is something which is not exactly what you would expect or what you would hope for, you need to be able to evaluate what are the risks. So here you can just add some sticky notes again with ideas of what the risks could be. Maybe the code doesn't exist. So let's say that they have explained to you the whole method and that you have a working demo. You could check that the demo is looking like it's working. Yeah. Okay. All right, so what maybe the core component, yeah. So I think a lot of you are actually, a lot of you have spotted the main big risk, which is that maybe they use a third party and then they just like packaged it in their own product. And maybe it works for that reason, but at some point they might not be able to supply that service anymore. And they don't add value or so much value to it. So I think this is really a big risk, which is quite real. Then related to that, it could be that it relies on some non-commercial third-party licenses, or maybe it's open source. So maybe like they're just relying on something which is out there. Okay. Then that. The code doesn't belong to them. So I think we can rule out that maybe it only works under very specific conditions, in the sense that you should be able to have a sense of that in the demo. Okay, this one is interesting too. I mean, they recognize the value of their IP, so they don't want to show their code to anyone. But if that were the case, then they wouldn't expose how it works. So of course, like they wouldn't send you the whole code, or they wouldn't send it, they would just show like part of it. But a priori, that should not be the case. Too out of the box to be coded, but works pretty strongly as a demo. How do you mean? Okay, there may be an honest reason. They worry about IP leakage for you or your colleagues. Sometimes it's our case. I think this could be the case, yeah, that they actually worry. Like, I mean, you can sign as many papers as you want. At the end, it's also a matter of trust. So I think they could worry, but at the same time, then I think they should not also explain how it works in the first place. Okay, I think this is also a very possible case that they're doing tricks that are not scalable or flexible enough for other situations. So maybe, I mean, at the same time, in the demo, you should be able to assess it. But it could be that it's not that scalable. And the other thing is, and it's related just here, maybe they're doing something fishy, which is not legal. So the case might be that this could be maybe the data set that they've trained it on, which was not so legal. The other thing that could be is maybe they're using some dirty hacks on the hardware or something, and you don't know if this will still work later or if it is allowed. I have seen, yeah, so I think that could happen, that you have an off the rack. So you customize it, but then these are different situations, yeah. But I think if it works on very narrow, so I'm reading this, like that maybe the deep learning model only works on very narrow use cases and fraud. But I think if this is the case, then you should be able to see it with the demo. Okay, the code, yeah, maybe it doesn't exist, and that goes with they're using a third party. It could be that the code is very poor quality. So that's okay. I think this could well be the case. But then I think it's not a very smart move from the startup to conceal it, because you've seen all the other possible reasons, and some of them are much worse than the quality of the code. So there is always a bit of hope that the quality of the code could be improved, and at least hopefully it's still readable. But with the other things, like there's little hope. Okay. Yeah. So everything. So the data, the model, the deployment need to work together. That's true. So the code quality, code could be messy. Maybe it has security issues. Okay, maybe it's written in the programming language that is not used, and so on. I think all these are like the code is not so great, and so they're a bit ashamed or worried that this might be perceived negatively. But again, I think it's probably better for the startup to show the code. Okay, great. Do you have any questions so far? I'm speaking a lot. So, no questions?
What are we missing?
What are you missing in the, what are the reasons?
Yeah, is there anything that we were missing?
Yeah, actually, I think I couldn't think of some more reasons. Maybe there are, but I don't.
I had a question regarding the point you made about using too much third party and just being a wrapper around that. Mm-hmm. So how do you quantify if there's real value add? Isn't this more about defensibility more than the reality of the claims?
Yes, totally. But then they should tell you, okay, if upfront they tell you, okay, we're using this library or this service, it means that the claims are real, maybe. Mm-hmm. But if they don't tell you like, oh, actually we do it with our own method, it's like this and that, and then they refuse to show you, then maybe there is something fishy.
Understood. So it is trying to attribute somebody else's achievement as theirs. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I have another question. I would like to better understand how to handle that situation when I, as a startup, have to refuse to give such data to investors. And that's exactly our actual case. Okay. When someone is asking me too much specific information about the laser frequencies we use, the chemical formulas we use, etc. And I really don't like to give it away, especially to another continent where I don't have a control at all. So what is a gentle and honest way to handle that situation with investors?
Yeah. So the first thing is, I mean, is the person that is doing it, like, are they a competitor or not? Or?
No, it's apparently belongs to big VC group in United States, but he's very well educated in our area, and he's constantly working with other companies in the same industry. That's why I'm worried, and I have very little track record of working with him. So this is just US company who came to us out of blue, and I don't have a full trust so far.
I think so. I don't know. Maybe there are some VCs in the room as well. I think it's not super common to have the exact same thing, like to invest in several companies that do the same thing. So they might be in the same area, but I don't think it's super common that they do the exact same product.
In the same area, they're not competing each other, but they're still in one very niche industry where many people know each other, despite they're not competitors directly.
Okay. I mean, then the other thing is if you have like a secret recipe, maybe it's not necessary to know all the very fine details to still assess if you're doing a good job or not. So you have to see a bit like, are there details that you could say, okay, this we don't want to show? Like, I don't know, like the frequency of something. If the rest is very meaningful. So if it makes sense that one can check that you're competent in the area and that you can demonstrate that this works. I mean, do we need to know the frequency of the laser? I'm not sure exactly what you're doing, but like to just assess this or not. Just like, for example, yeah, it's difficult to find example. But for example, when I check the code, I don't want to have like the whole code base and download it and play with that. It's more that I want to check like one specific point. I'm going to ask for a sample of somewhere, and then I see, okay, does it make sense? Like, how well is it done? So I think it's a bit of a, maybe not necessary to have like all the parameters of everything as well. But if you know, like, okay, there is a parameter and this is how we adjust it, should be good enough, no?
Okay, so the idea is just partly share the information, but still don't give it all.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, that's why I did this exercise with everyone here, is that you have to just understand what happens maybe in the mind of the person who checks. When you're withholding information, they might ask themselves a lot of questions. You have to see if there is maybe a way that you can still share something, but not everything, that would allow them to cross out some of the options. So for example, in our example we're looking at, one of the objections was maybe it doesn't work, but actually with a demo, you can see if it works or not. With a demo where you have your own data, then you should be able to see if it works or not.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Yeah, so the defensibility, to break the TT into distinct steps, play the annotation. Yeah. Yeah, so of course, to Alexander's comment on the how you break the DD down, of course, then it goes actually into all these steps. So here I'm just simplifying for time reasons, just to give you the big elements that people are looking at. And I think it also depends a lot on the type of startup. So if it's an AI startup, you would see how they collect data and so on. And so, yeah, this depends. Okay. So good. So now, any more questions on that? No. Okay. So now let's move on to the next point. So the defensibility is just the next slide, number 4, next frame. All right, so you can add your sticky notes to the defensible point. Okay, patents. Okay, so the first thing on how hard it is for another company to come to this point is, I think, so that's the summary of what you're looking for with defensibility. Then there is the patent data. Talent team. Yeah, so this is IP. Okay, so I think we have very clear clusters here. Okay. So first, let's start with the easier one, the team. So it's a good idea to know who is working on the project. So you can ask, what are the members of the team? What is their role? When did they join? Like some flags might be if you see that on the core area that they're working on, you don't have so many people. So maybe this is okay, maybe not. Then another thing is if you see that some of the people who created the technology left the company, are there new people who took over, and are they able to understand how it works or not? Or also another thing that that happens sometimes is it's a very new startup. They hired a lot of interns, and maybe it's a legitimate worry that some of the interns might leave. Okay, then yes, is there a key person? Exactly. Okay, and then again on the team, you can evaluate a bit their competence throughout the due diligence. You can see if the answers they give you are good or not. You can ask them hypothetical questions on how would you solve this problem that you have, or just what I like to do is sometimes to ask a bit of a generic question on how would you address this or that problem, where you have a lot of different options. So you can see a bit like how many of the options they get. I also like to ask how people generally approach a problem, so that you see a bit how they're thinking, and if they are more agile or more like planning everything in advance. Then there is a lot on IP and data. And so, in fact, if you go to the slide number 6 now, frame number 6, there are little dots. So I think we might need more dots. And then you can take them and put them next to what you think is more important. Is it data or patent? I'm just curious to see what's your ideas. Okay, so just let's say 5 more seconds to vote. I think there's a bit of an influence, no, that the first people who voted influenced the next ones. Okay, but still we see that there is a lot more on data. So now I'll just go back to the defensibility frame. It's number 4. And so you see there were these 2 clusters here of data or IP. So the thing with IP and so patents are very difficult to defend for computer startups. So anything that is AI related, it's quite difficult. And the reason is that you have often to look into how it works to be able to show that there is a pattern. And there is no way that you can go and check what's running under the hood. So typically it will be difficult. The one case where it is possible is when you can see it from outside, just the behavior of the product. This is something that could be defensed. The data is, of course, something that has potentially a value, but then it really depends on the specifics. So the questions to ask are, is the data which is there something public, or is it something that they collected? Is it something that they can use from one customer to the other? And this depends also on the contracts that they have with the customers, and this depends also on privacy. So maybe in the case of the fruit, maybe you can agree with the supermarket that as long as there is not something personal in that data, that you could use it for all the supermarkets. And that, of course, then the benefit that they have is that they'll have, all of them will have more accurate results. And so maybe this is something that they could agree. But then the other problem you might face is it really easy to transfer it from one place to the next? Maybe the line is so different in some places that it will be very difficult to use it. The other question is, how long does it take to build that data set? And if it's a long time, then, and there is no way around it, then maybe this is a good point as a defensibility point. Okay, now we have more things left. Okay, I think these are the main points for defensibility. And then we'll go to scalability. So it's the frame number 5. And here you can add your sticky notes. It's the last frame, so maybe you're getting a bit tired of working. Okay. All right. So what we have here, well, first there is a whole aspect on the architecture, and I think it starts here with the cloud. So is it based on cloud, and then is it scalable with cloud, or is it something which needs some servers in that case, or or some special hardware or something. So in that very specific case, then they will need probably to have at least like a phone or something like that. But it could also be a specific camera, and then this needs to be connected either to a local computer or to use the computing capabilities of the phone, or it will need to send data over, and then this could be processed either on a specific server or in the cloud. And when it's in the cloud, you have different types of possibilities. So either you will have some scalable server, or either actually you have some fixed server, which is the worst case probably if there is a lot of scalability needs, or you will have some scalable servers, or you will have some functions that are scalable by default. Then on the practices, this is also super important to understand, like how do they deploy, how do they operate, do they have, also in terms of coding, do they have documentation somewhere, or at least do they have a wiki or something, where they explain how everything works. So when they onboard also a new engineer, how does that go? When they want to deploy a new version, is that a struggle, or is there a risk that it goes wrong? Then there is a question on the human services. I think this may be, I'm not sure where I have to put this, but I think there was something about labeling it here. So if someone needs to label the data in the loop, if this is the client, for example, then maybe this is more okay. But then if it is a specialist who needs to spend a lot of time, this may be both a bottleneck for scalability, but at the same time, maybe it makes things a bit more defensible. So one has to see there. Then how straightforward are the concepts? So this is, actually this is on, I think this is on defensibility. Also, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the super obvious thing is if they come up with an idea which is not out of a textbook, and which you think like, aha, this is really smart, then it makes it a lot more defensible. Okay, yeah, this is a very good one. So can you scale it to other sectors as well? So is this something that could be used for other things? And so when you're doing a due diligence, you're not only looking at what the problems could be, but also what the opportunities could be. And this means that you might also want to help them a little bit there. So maybe, so at the end, you only report to the investor, but you still might want to have enough information to understand whether this could be that they could do something more out of that product. So it could be either that they take their product and then they can use it for something additional, or that they could add some new feature, or maybe they take their product and you can see that you can break it down into smaller products and that maybe there is a bigger market for one of them. So that goes with also how big is the market. Down here. So this is also super important on the data part. Not only are there people involved, but also how much data do you need. And this is also important to know whether this whole thing makes sense or not. So whether it's coherent or not. Okay. And another thing which is important is, I think, to generally have an idea of this integration. So how much integration do you need? How much work do you need? This is something which you can get answered by also asking all the specific steps of what's needed, so you can estimate whether this makes sense or not. And then there is something on the costs as well. Yeah. So basically, you can have an idea of how much it actually costs as they scale, and does that make it very lucrative or not? And you also want to ask yourself, how much they help to reduce the costs. So how big of a problem is it in the first place? And I think I'm going to wrap up there just for me now. Also, it's important to understand the local market specifics. Maybe they're operating just in one country or geography, and then you want to understand like if really this could be something for other places. Okay. Well, now there is still a little bit of time. There's short time for extra questions if you have. I mean, I can stay longer. So if you have more questions, just
so yeah. Maybe, Julian, thank you very much for this good show into what is needed. And my question would be, how can we prepare ourselves better, or what is, how can we be proactive? Because now we're talking about nasty questions, but, why not start by making it easier to do an assessment? What would you suggest we should do?
You mean as a startup, how to prepare?
Yes, how to prepare and how to be proactive so that, a lot of the questions are obviously answered in a good way.
Mm-hmm. So I think the best way to prepare is to do this process of thinking like, what if I were the investor? What questions would I ask for this type of startup? And then to just always take the other view. Take the other side's view, like do maybe an internal assessment, have someone who could ask all these questions, like structure it by thinking, okay, at the end, you want your startup to be, let's say, scalable, defensible, and to check that everything is true. And so what are the questions you would ask for this type of business? And I think it's good if you do this also quite ahead of when this happens. So maybe you also have time to actually change a bit how things are done. For example, if you see, okay, it's important that there is some kind of process about development in the company, that when you deploy something, how it's done and so on. This is not something you want to change overnight, but maybe this is something you can start with. So I think it's just good to have someone, maybe you can also have someone external, but it could be just someone who is working already with you, who could just like check how would they do it if they were not working there, and they want to know whether this works.
Okay, thank you.
So
sorry, I have to go.
My question would be, the scenario that you described was a deep technology scenario where the AI, data, and other assets are crucial to the value of the company for the investor. Mm-hmm. How much of this would still remain relevant, and how would we need to think about it if we are not focused that deeply on that AI or deep technology space? For example, I'm building a B2B SaaS, which has some HR workloads. Certainly there are some AI aspects of this, but this is not core to the value. So how much diligence should I expect, and how should I think about it?
Mm-hmm. I guess like on the if you're doing a SaaS, then the investor will still want to see that it's scalable. And there the technologies involved are quite similar. So how well does it scale on the cloud and so on? How are the engineers working together, and how do they make sure the processes are fine? Like, is the problem that you're solving bringing a lot of value to which geographies or to which kind of people? Are they people happy with it? Can they see a demo with whatever like own experience they'll be bringing? Is there some kind of lock-in effect, network effect? Mm-hmm. Is there some kind of thing that makes it that the more you use it, the more you want to use it, and you can't really switch to another one? So I think there are still quite a lot of things that are in there. And also maybe like, do you do it in a very different way? Do you understand something else than the others on the market?
So you're saying that the same process would apply with obviously the adjustments necessary for the domain that we are addressing. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
Welcome. Okay. Any more things you want to know?
I can always ask more questions. So how long does it take, the process, in practical terms?
Yeah, it depends a lot on the investor and on the stage of the startup.
Mm-hmm.
So some investors, they want something more thorough because they think it's good for them to really understand. Some of them, they want more or less like a stem that says like it's good enough. And of course, the more advanced the startup is, the more it will take time. So in practice, for let's say seed Series A, I usually do like 2.5 days interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sometimes do like follow-up interviews when there is some more questions that I have. So, and usually the overall time frame is quite short because everyone wants to go fast. So typically it's like 1-2 weeks.
We will take a couple of questions more and then we can just close this session. Mm-hmm. If there are more questions, someone else has some more questions to Julien.
Julien, from the defensibility, we mentioned this kind of regulations and so on the market also as a limitation for scaling, but of course it could be also part of the defensibility, or if you are ahead in certain regulations or have a bigger footprint from countries you're already working in, even maybe you don't have the most innovative model on the market, but you are ahead like 1-2 years, because these are usually the areas which take a long time and you cannot influence. You cannot really speed up that much. Is that correct?
Yeah, of course. A good example that just comes to mind is, for example, privacy. Mm-hmm. So imagine that you're a privacy-focused startup and you're based in Switzerland, and maybe you have an edge just because of the location compared to some other places.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Or existent licenses or licenses to work on different markets already, which are limited or which need a public body to approve first, for example, like in insurance or other regulated businesses.
Totally, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or a specific partnership you have. So I don't know, I had the case of a startup that had a partnership with a big industry player, and then they could collect all their data on something, and just from that, like, of course, they had an edge.
Mm-hmm. And one short thing you mentioned, okay, so first step is NDA, second step are the typical questions we've gone through in detail. There was a third step. Did I miss it, or what or was it?
No, like the step in after the NDA, like the company will typically, or I will ask them to give a report, like a short presentation on how it works.
Okay.
And then like to speak to them.
So it's the report in the end. Okay, I could not remember, and the slides are not there anymore.
And
okay.
Also there was this question before on the how the interview, like the time frame and so on. Mm-hmm. So you see the time is a bit. I mean, it's quite limited. Maybe it sounds like a lot, like 1 day of speaking, but it's still limited. And then it's like sometimes like the startups will just start speaking a lot on things which are not so necessarily relevant, and then it makes the time shorter. And of course, like from my perspective, it's not super nice. I'll always try to reframe it to what I'm interested in. But I think it's not a super good strategy to try to make the time shorter. Like if I get everything I want to hear in a shorter time, then it's at some point I will stop asking nasty questions. So anyways.
You are not an audit, like where you lay out everything to make a good impression, but you need to focus on what's important. Understood.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for coming. And thank you, Julian, for this insightful workshop. We will share the record that, sorry, we didn't mention before. We are recording this for everyone who missed it or for everyone who could not attend the full workshop. We will share it via our digest and also during our weekly calls for those startups that are right now for our weekly calls. Yep. And Julian, thank you so much for your help.
All right, thanks for having me, and have a great day, everyone. If you have more questions, I'm always available.
Thanks, Julien.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.